Throughout our discussions here in the desert, Paul Davies and I have marvelled over the subtlety and beauty of nature. We've puzzled over the paradoxes of existence. We've celebrated the majesty of the cosmos. But whereas we may agree on the scientific facts, we differ sharply on their interpretation. Paul has written several books on the metaphysical implications of science. But does the God that physicists talk about, and they often seem to, bear the slightest resemblance to the popular notions of God I long ago rejected? And where does science stop and faith begin? Science versus faith, Paul. Faith versus science. Isn't it true that in a very profound sense, science is a faith?
I think the whole of the scientific enterprise is founded on an act of faith. You can't be a scientist unless you believe that there's a really existing order in nature. Science is about uncovering that order in nature. If you thought that the order in nature was some cultural construct, just something we impose onto nature, something we read into nature rather than read out of nature, I don't think you could honestly be a scientist. You've got to believe that in following the scientific path, you're uncovering something that's really there. And furthermore, that this order that we see in nature is intelligible to us, because after all, if we could make nothing of it, then we would make no progress at all in science. So it's a huge act of faith that it's both ordered and intelligible.
Could the universe have been otherwise?
Einstein once said that the thing that most interested him was whether God had any choice in the nature of his creation. Perhaps we should say her creation. But although Einstein wasn't conventionally religious, I think he expressed a very real puzzle here as to whether or not the order we see in nature is logically necessary. That if we knew enough about nature, if we had this theory of everything that we were talking about in the last episode, we would find it's the only logically consistent theory that there could be. In other words, there's only one way in which the universe could be put together with logical and mathematical consistency. And under those circumstances, this would be the only universe and there'd be nothing left to explain. But it's the job of the theoretical physicist to invent imaginary model worlds, logically consistent universes that are not this universe, but some impoverished or simplified version thereof. And all the time, we come up with these simple mathematical models that would do as rather uninteresting universes. Well, we don't live in those, so it's very clear to me that the universe could have been otherwise. This law-like order in nature could have been different. And of course, that begs the question, why this universe? Indeed, why any universe at all?
I don't wish to sound scientifically blasphemous, but what's so special about this universe?
I think there are a number of special features when you look at it. The first thing is a topic we discussed in an earlier episode, that the laws of nature, the laws of physics, seem to be remarkably felicitous in the way they encourage matter and energy to become ever more complex, to go from the featureless origins of the Big Bang through to the richness and diversity that leads to such things as living organisms and thinking beings who can sit back and reflect on the meaning of it all. If you just picked any old rag bag of laws, then the chances are you would either be led to a universe that was totally chaotic, cosmic anarchy, or something that would be so boring and repetitive that it wouldn't lead to anything very useful at all. So that's one way in which it's very special. There are a number of other ways as well that if you imagine playing the role of a deity, you've got a shopping list of laws in front of you, and you can pick from this long list of possible laws. And maybe there are laws that are very similar to, but not quite the same as our own. Perhaps you could twiddle a few knobs, to use a different analogy, and change a few things. I'm not talking about moving objects around. I'm talking about supposing we could change the strength of gravity or the masses of some of the subatomic particles, some of these things. Then a mathematical study very soon shows you that if you were to change the present arrangement of things very much, then the existence of complex structures, and in particular of sentient beings, would almost certainly be impossible. So it does seem that there are a number of aspects in which the particular set of laws that apply to this actual universe are really rather special.
But Paul, let me raise an objection. Should intelligent beings be surprised if they find themselves in a universe which is appropriate and hospitable to intelligent beings?
Yes and no. It's no surprise that we exist here on the surface of a planet. it's very obvious that life has evolved here because this is a suitable niche within the universe, and it's very atypical. However, what we're talking about, or what I was talking about, is not our spatial location or our temporal location. It's the underlying laws of the universe. And these laws are supposed to be eternal laws. They're universal. They apply everywhere, every when. And what I'm saying is that the particular laws in this universe are very, very special.
As an atheist, I put it to you that isn't it possible that other universes exist or did exist or will exist where, because of slight variations on the theme, they don't play out as satisfactorily as ours, and it is not possible for conscious beings to sit around in them and rejoice in them.
Yes, this is often said, that the world we live in is the world we live in, that if we imagine a vast assemblage of universes, each with slightly different laws, slightly different conditions, then perhaps only in a tiny fraction of those universes would life and consciousness arise, and those beings would perhaps rejoice in their good fortune. But they would be mistaken in supposing that somehow there was any design or they'd been selected for in some way. They themselves have selected the universe they live in. Now, this is a very popular antidote to any sort of talk of design, and I think we have to take it seriously as a possibility. However, I think there are some shortcomings. The most obvious shortcoming is that, by definition, these other worlds are not worlds we're going to observe. They're independent of this universe, and so we can't really falsify, we can't test this hypothesis at all. And some people might think that invoking an infinity of unseen worlds is even worse than invoking an unseen God. So you have to be careful. But I think there's a more serious objection, and that is that there are many law-like aspects of this universe which, if those laws were to fail or falter, would not be life-threatening.
For instance?
Well, let me give you an example. If the law of conservation of electric charge, which is a very fundamental law of physics, should falter, if it should get a little bit wobbly, then there would be no way in which small variations of electric charge would be life-threatening. We could still be here, we could still be having this conversation. And so if you're going to argue that the existence of life is somehow selecting from what is ultimately just chaos, the appearance of law, then you would have to contend with the fact that every time we see law-like aspects in nature, any sort of contravention or faltering of those laws would threaten the existence of life, and it clearly doesn't. In other words, the law-like order in nature is just too good, it's too refined, to be explained as simply a selection effect, that we only see a lawful universe because that's the only universe we can live in.
How does your view differ from the anthropic view?
Well, the anthropic view, I suppose I should just explain that the so-called anthropic principle, which was introduced into science by Brandon Carter about 20 years ago, it comes in a weak and a strong version. In the weak version, it simply says that living organisms will only exist in a universe or a part of a universe that is consistent with biology, consistent with the emergence of complexity and consciousness. That's just really a tautology. No one would object to that. It's obviously true. And I gave a trivial example about life existing on the surface of the Earth. We don't exist out there in empty space. And there are some other examples as well. But there's a stronger version of the anthropic principle, which I think a lot of people would object to, which says that there's some element of compulsion. In other words, that the universe must be such as to arrange its laws and conditions in order that life and consciousness should emerge to observe it. In other words, it takes the point of view that a universe that goes unobserved is a meaningless concept.
It's a universe not worth having, in a way.
Sort of. And so this somehow implies that there's a link in a rather deeper way between the existence of conscious beings and the laws that give rise to them. Now, I think many scientists would be happy, and all scientists would probably be happy with the weak version. Very few would be happy with the strong version. But this discussion about the fact that you can't have any old universe and still have conscious beings, at least certainly not conscious beings of the sort we're familiar with, it's a very useful one. Because it shows that in some sense the laws of physics are rather special. You see, some people just dismiss it and say, well, if it hadn't been that way, we wouldn't be here to worry about it. So what? Well, you can take that attitude. You can shrug your shoulders and say, well, we're jolly lucky that that's what happened. But to me, it does suggest something a little bit deeper.
But it seems to me the direction of your argument is taking us to a position where once again we seem to be, our life seems to be, crucial to this progress.
Depends what you mean by us here, and I think this is a very important point. Anthropic principle sounds very much like Homo sapiens back at the centre of the universe, and that's not what is intended. Most of the investigations that try to see the conditions under which life will emerge and so on simply draw a very broad picture and just talk about, say, carbon-based life, the existence of carbon being crucial to Earth life. There's no suggestion that our species, still less life on Earth, is a key part in this. It's simply saying that if somewhere and somewhen in the unfolding drama of the universe, some sort of sentient beings are going to emerge, then this places rather stringent conditions on the nature of the laws of physics. And the fact that we live in a universe which has those conditions is very suggestive. But that's all. I don't think you can... It's merely circumstantial evidence for something deeper, something, as I like to say, going on. But you don't have to draw that conclusion. You could just say, well, it's just jolly lucky that it's happened, and I won't inquire deeper. But if we're interested in the underlying issues, in the deeper metaphysical issues, in the why behind the how, you're inevitably struck by what seems to be an extraordinary coincidence.
You've mentioned design, which of course suggests a designer, but before we look at that, is it not true that Darwin disposed of the notion of design?
Yeah, the design argument for the existence of God, the so-called watchmaker argument, was very popular a couple of hundred years ago, and it was largely from looking at biological systems that this argument became popular. And you're absolutely right that this argument was demolished by Darwin and Darwinian evolution because there's a very good mechanism, namely variation and natural selection that Darwin taught us, which can produce the appearance of design when there is no design. So if you ask me about features such as the human eye, which seems so well adapted to its purpose, I wouldn't have said that as a specific entity is an example of design, because we can see how the competition of different organisms, if you have some sort of ensemble of competing organisms, competing species, we can see how that competition can lead to the emergence of very clever-looking organs. So I accept that Darwinian picture. But I'm talking about an appearance of design not in the objects of the universe, not in the physical systems, but in the underlying laws. Yeah. And the difficulty that you have, if you want to argue along Darwinian lines, that somehow the laws have emerged as a result of natural selection, is that we don't readily see anything like, a population of universes with a population of laws slugging it out, red in tooth and claw, so that only a universe that is felicitously adapted as far as the emergence of life is concerned comes out at the end as the survivor. Now, there have been sort of rather crude attempts by some physicists and cosmologists to link a sort of cosmic Darwinism to Darwinism on Earth. I don't find these very convincing. So I think when we're dealing with the universe and the laws of the universe, and for all we know there's one universe and one set of laws, it's very hard to use this sort of Darwinian reasoning to say that that's where the appearance of design comes from.
So we're not looking for the watchmaker, but we are looking for the legislator.
Right.
And you're sometimes accused of the sin or the heresy of teleology. Would you explain that to me?
Yes. Teleology is the belief in final causes. It's a very ancient idea. It goes back to Aristotle, at least. The idea that a physical system, maybe the whole universe, is being drawn towards some preordained final state. There's a guiding hand of the divine that somehow manipulates or encourages physical systems towards this final destiny, which is somehow written down in advance. It's anathema to scientists, this type of teleology. Now, I might say that it's anathema to me as well, on the assumption that there is a final destiny already decided. I've tried to introduce a notion that I whimsically call teleology without teleology, by which I mean the following, that if the laws of physics, the laws of nature in general, are specially chosen, if they're rather clever, then they won't fix the final state, but they will encourage or facilitate the evolution of matter and energy along certain pathways towards, for example, greater complexity and greater organisation. So the outcome is interesting, but it's not determined. And that's a very simple analogy that I like to use with the game of chess. If I give you a checkerboard and some pieces and say, invent me a game, the chances are, if you just pick any old rules, that the game would either be very repetitive and boring or almost certainly just totally chaotic. Either way, it would be uninteresting. Now, the actual rules of chess, of course, have been very, very carefully selected to lead to a rich and interesting variety of play. But having determined the rules of chess, the specific details of any given game are not fixed in advance. That depends on the play. And so here we see this exquisite mix of chance and necessity that I've been referring to through these programs, that the laws of physics, the laws of nature, like the rules of chess, and the game is like the working out of the universe, the great cosmic experiment. But the end isn't fixed, it's open. But these laws, because they encourage or facilitate certain types of evolutionary behaviour that look very interesting, that lead to complexity and organisation, that amplify these trends, mimic the effect of teleology. It's as if these things have been designed for a final cause. The individual things haven't been designed, but there is still this hint of design in the underlying laws.
As an atheist, I'm constantly pointing out to true believers who attack me or write to me that most religions have a use-by date. That Odin, Thor, Vulcan, Zeus, Ra, they're all gone.
Right.
The pantheon is sort of gradually emptying. And I've always argued that as science advances, God recedes, the God of the gaps. This is one of the many gods, I believe, that you don't like.
Absolutely. I've never liked the notion of a cosmic magician, a sort of super being who lives in the sky or beyond the sky, who created everything in the first place and then intervenes from time to time to fix it up when things go wrong. This is the God of the gaps you referred to, the notion that that at any given time we only understand part of the natural world around us. There are gaps in our knowledge, and that's the place to insert God. But of course, as science advances, those gaps get smaller and smaller, and God is squeezed out of them until he or she is squeezed off the edge of space and time altogether and seems to be totally redundant. So you're on a hiding to nothing, I think, if you want to invoke some sort of supernatural, super being, cosmic magician to intervene from time to time to work miracles. And as a scientist, I find the notion of miracles utterly repugnant. First of all, because I rejoice in the lawfulness of the universe and in the beautiful nature of the laws of physics, and I would hate to think of them being sort of arbitrarily broken. But secondly, I wouldn't think much of a being who creates a universe, but this universe is flawed and has to be meddled with.
Come back and tinker with it, fine-tune. Yeah.
The idea of a universe which has laws that are so clever, that where things work so well, that the universe can take care of itself, the laws of nature can perform the necessary miracles, is much more inspiring. So I say that there are no miracles other than the miracle of nature itself.
Your work is frequently appropriated, almost deliberately misrepresented by New Agers and by some Christian theologians. I think it's important, therefore, to continue with the gods that you dismiss. You're not in any sense believing in a personal God.
I think there are really two sorts of gods that have been around, and we might crudely say that one of these, the personal God, is the God concerned with human behaviour, morality, preservation of life after death, a guardian angel type of God. I would love to believe that there is such a being, but I find it very difficult to do so. Then we've got the other sort of God, much more remote, much more powerful in a sense, much more awesome. This is God, the architect of the cosmos, this abstract, timeless being that is somehow responsible for the overall organisation and structure and lawfulness of the universe. This is another type of God, and of course most of the world's religions try to merge these two characters, the God, the creator of everything, this grand scheme, and the personal God, and they have a lot of difficulty. And of course,
they blur them hopelessly.
Christianity actually has to go into a trinity, to have three gods before it can really sort this out. And so my feeling is that whilst I'd love to believe in a guardian angel, personal God, I find it very difficult as a scientist to do so. But when it comes to this, and I hesitate to even use the word God, but this felicitous, pleasing, harmonious, almost contrived, and especially ingenious nature of the lawfulness of the cosmos, it's the ingenuity, I think, that I find most inspiring, then to me that cries out for something like meaning or purpose. I realise both of those words are loaded and we have to use them very carefully, but something like meaning or purpose behind it all. There's one important point that I think we have to inject here, because usually discussions of this sort get hung up on an old argument, sometimes called the cosmological argument for the existence of God, that if you're using God to explain the universe, you get into the problem of who created God.
Exactly the question I was going to put to you.
I'm sorry to...
As a child, I could not accept the notion of God because, as I'd say to any adult who proposed it, who begun God?
Right.
And you often got a clip over the ears for asking it.
Absolutely.
But it
right,
seems to me an immensely powerful question.
And of course, it's a very legitimate question. And so people often ask, well, what made the Big Bang go bang? Who created the universe? There must have been something there before the Big Bang. Somebody or something must have started it all off. And that's God, the great architect, the creator God. Well, of course, I was at pains to point out in an earlier episode that modern physics, and indeed one strand of the Christian tradition, going back to Augustine, insists that time itself came into existence with the Big Bang. The universe began with time, not in time. Absolutely fundamental, because what we are not talking about is some super being or force or power that was there before the universe, before in the temporal sense, sitting there for all eternity, and then pressing a button, bang, the universe appears, and then sitting back to watch or maybe meddling from time to time. So we're not talking about something that was there before. We're talking about something which is timeless, something outside of time, indeed space, altogether. And the closest analogy that I can get to that, and it may be more than an analogy, is mathematics. If you ask, where is the number 11? Well, it isn't anywhere. It's not in space. It's not in time. And the statement that 11 is a prime number is a true statement, whether there's a universe here or not.
What you're proposing isn't going to hold your hand on your deathbed. This proposition isn't going to calm you when you look at mortality. This is too remote and chilling a notion, isn't it?
That's right. And a lot of people think that they haven't got any time for this notion of God, that they're only interested in the guardian angel.
But Paul, there are people who will accept any definition of God, who will run to you and say thank you.
Yes, that's the word. That's the problem of the word. I don't like using the word, because what I'm describing, I have to say, comes rather close to the conception of God that many modern Christian theologians have. I don't find there's a great deal of difference when I talk to them.
That's the more sophisticated and progressive
absolutely right, but it's a world away from the God that comes across from the pulpit on a Sunday.
Do you remember we were talking in an earlier episode about how the term Big Bang was recently reviewed by scientists in the hope they could find a better term? Perhaps it's time for you to apply your considerable intellect to finding a better word than God.
We want a word that in some way captures the ingenuity, the fact that as a scientist, for me science is an intellectual exercise, and if you're solving a puzzle, you can't help but feel that somebody set the puzzle in the first place. That one way of looking at this is that the laws of nature, which I've been talking about and celebrating, are not obvious to us at a glance. We don't look around and see Newton's laws of motion actually happening. If we see the apple fall, we see a falling apple. We don't see a set of differential equations.
Well, I see a falling apple. I'm sure you do see a set
I don't
of
see.
equations.
I see exactly the same as you. To get at the underlying laws, we have to be really rather clever. We have to go through all sorts of arcane procedures. We need to use mathematical analysis and laboratory experiments and so on. You have to work rather hard to dig out these underlying laws of nature. And if we take a field that we were talking about in an earlier episode, the fundamental particle physics and the abstract symmetries there, you have to work very hard indeed to dig out those laws. So it's almost as if the laws of nature are written in code, and that doing science is breaking the code.
And you need a special priesthood to do the code breaking.
That's right. So we've got this decoding ability, extraordinary thing that humans have this decoding ability, that nature's intelligible, that we're able to crack the cosmic code. But to believe this cosmic code is somehow self-generating, self-flying, self-sustaining, strains credulity. It seems that somehow our ability to break the code and the existence of the code have got to be linked in some deep way, but not in the sort of crass way of, in the beginning, there was some sort of being who we don't explain, and the being invented a code and a universe and plonked humans in it. I won't have that. It's something much more subtle, and it's something, because we're taking time away as a dimension, it's not a question of a causal sequence of events. It's something which is more of a logical interweaving of levels. So we're beginning to sort of tease out a much more sophisticated notion of meaning or purpose, that when I use the word God, which I do reluctantly, I mean something like that which underpins or guarantees this mathematical law-like order in nature. It's the thing that underpins it all.
Shortly before he died, I interviewed that considerable Australian historian, Manning Clark. And Manning said that he had a shy belief in the existence of God. Now, it seems to me that you have more than a shy belief, but less than a certainty.
It's certainly less than a certainty.